What does it take for you to feel like you got your money's worth from a magic book purchase? Is it getting one trick that you'll use? What about a sleight that you can put in your standard rotation? In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 tips that will have you getting value out of your magic library in no time. I understand, magic books aren't cheap and you want to feel like you're getting something from each one. I mean, some books cost $60 these days and others cost $100. So how do we ensure that we're getting the worth out of each book that we want? Look, we've all been disappointed after an initial read-through of a magic book. But what I want to focus on is how you can feel better after getting and learning from a new book. So let's talk about how we can fix this in a very simple and practical way. How can we extract valuable information from each book that we own? After all, if you're getting value out of your library, it means that you can keep investing into the library, which is what we all want, right? The first tip I have for you is what I call one big thing. This is something I learned a while ago. The idea is you read a book and you plan to just get one idea from it. That's right, don't stress yourself over trying to remember every little detail. Instead, use the way we process information to your advantage. We're going to judo this. Because statistics show us you're only going to remember a few ideas, whether you hear it or you read it or however you absorb your information, you're only going to remember a couple of things. So make the plan to just walk away with one big takeaway. When you're done reading the book, whether or not you read it cover to cover, be able to articulate what the overall premise of the book was. Don't put pressure on yourself to remember every little detail. Because if you like the book and that one key takeaway is big enough, the chances are good that you'll revisit that topic at a future date and get a second takeaway. That's right, each time you revisit the book, you can take away one more thing. And if you're getting that one biggest thing that jumps out at you, that's worth a lot. Let me give you a personal example from my own library. When I read John Graham's Stage by Stage, the one big takeaway for me was that if you're a close-up magician, you can adapt what you already do to play for a much larger audience. That takeaway alone is extremely valuable because now if I find myself in that situation, needing to perform for a bigger group when I mostly do smaller tricks, I now know where I can go to find more information. And I'm beginning to build value into that book on my shelf, even though I don't remember every single thing that it says. Tip number 2 is to blend ideas together. Don't be afraid as you're reading to let your mind wander or to mentally or physically experiment with different possibilities. When you come across a good idea in a book, file it away in both your memory and in your journal. Sometimes the biggest value in a book is when you read about a sleight or an idea that is actually adapted into something that you already do or a different trick that what you're reading wasn't intended for. In fact, sometimes it can pay to stop what you're doing, go get the other book, and see if the sleight or idea that you just read would actually fit in. Or it may not be a sleight or idea, it could be an actual trick. So if you read a trick that you think you might like that could play well for you, stop what you're doing, go get the props, and walk through it with those props in hand to see if your initial hypothesis was right. Let me give you another example here from my own personal experience. I was reading a Simon Aronson book and he said something about using one-way back designs in a trick. That sparked an idea for me about something I was working on, and I immediately came up with several applications of that principle to tricks I already know and perform. To elaborate further, I perform impromptu out of this world. But if you apply what Simon Aronson wrote about, which is what I did, you can now do that same trick without ever looking at the faces of the cards. That doesn't necessarily make it a better trick, but it makes it more adaptable because now you can do certain phases of the trick differently and they might play more strongly for your audiences. Of course, this is just one example from my own experience, but there are dozens and dozens of ways to apply what I just talked about in tip number 2. Number 3, and this is of course geared to all of us, but especially my beginners out there, that is to talk to others. Get some feedback. I've found that the magic community is one of the most joyful and sharing communities in which I've had the privilege to participate. If you ask other magicians for help, they're almost always willing to share ideas or tricks and point you in the right direction where you can read and learn more. Plus, what I was saying about beginners, if you're just getting started, this is a fantastic way to understand what makes for a good or at least a classic magic trick. A word of caution on this tip. I think there's a lot of value in understanding what other magicians are doing and why, learning from the professor or Slidini or some of the old masters, Marlowe, about the inner workings of a trick and what makes it a good trick. But my caution is that you don't want to just do the same tricks that everyone else is doing. Sure, you're probably going to start that way, but eventually you're going to want to break free of that and start to perform material that's specific to you, your personality, your interests, and the way you like to present magic. But in the meantime, there's a ton you can learn from the classics of magic and what makes them great tricks. If you're more of an advanced performer, then you should consider starting your own inner circle that can vet your thoughts and give you feedback on your performances. Pick people that you admire, people that you respect for their performance or thinking, and not just people who are offering unsolicited opinions. But don't be afraid to pick people who will be honest with you. You don't just need a room full of cheerleaders, although it is important to have that as well. Having a diverse group with varying perspectives will help give you the most feedback so that you can pick and choose what you want to adopt. An extremely successful example of this principle is the Long Beach Mystics. That's a group that was formed out in California a long time ago when a number of performers were very young. They got together with very little adult supervision and decided to start critiquing and giving each other feedback. The members of the Long Beach Mystics read like a veritable who's who of American magicians today. You're talking about names like Mike Caveney, Kevin James, Stan Allen, and Michael Weber. Can you imagine sitting in that room and hearing these young performers giving each other feedback? You don't need to get caught up on how cool their group is. Just start to form your own so that you can get valuable feedback on your routines or the things you're thinking about performing from people you trust and who know you well enough to offer good advice. Here's a bonus tip for you. Track what you're learning. If you don't like writing things down, you can always shoot a video of yourself by talking out the idea out loud on your phone's video and then storing it in a specific folder. This will remind you to check something out at a later time, or you can make a note of an interesting trick or idea. Trust me, one way or another, you need to kind of track your progress because it is extremely difficult to remember an idea that you had last week, even if you think it's such a great idea that how could you possibly forget? I have lost way more ideas than I've kept, unless I specifically took a note of them by either writing it down or shooting a video talking to my future self about this concept. It's important to me to help you get a lot of value out of your books because I've spent a lot of money on my library. If you want to know exactly how much I've spent and how you can save when you buy books, be sure to check out this video. As always, my Erudite friends, I appreciate you watching. And until next time, keep reading.